Walt Disney speaks of Hollywood union affairs and a sales communism.
I don't believe it's a political party. I believe it's an un-American thing. And the thing that I resent the most is that they are able to get into these unions and take them over and represent to the world that a group of people that are in my plant that I know are good 100% Americans are trapped by this group, and they're represented to the world as supporting all of those ideologies, and it's not so.
In 1941, Disney's highest-paid animator, Art Babbitt, resigned from the company's own union to join the Screen Cartoonists Guild. This came on the heels of many disputes, notably confusion over wage disparities, screen credits, and profit-sharing for the firm's first-ever animated feature film, Snow White. In response, Babbitt was fired by Walt Disney himself, and in response to that came the Disney Animators' strike. The strike lasted for 5 weeks, deepening already deep divides in the company's culture, and it only ended after the intervention of a mediator sent by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt himself, who ruled in the Guild's favour on every single issue. Disney was forced to recognise the Guild, and animators at his company have been signed to the Guild and its successors ever since, but the bad blood from a strike doesn't just go away. In 1947, Disney famously testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, accusing union organizer Herbert Sorrell of being a communist. The situation seems pretty cut and dry. Collective action from workers was able to force the media mogul to listen to their demands. So, if Disney, both the person and the corporation, were so humiliated by unions and communism, why on earth did the Walt Disney Company go on to make Newsies?
Newsboys go on strike. Want more profit on the sale of 2 evening papers, 2 for cent and nothing, to be the battle cry. About 300 newsboys decided not to sell the Evening World and the Evening Journal and went on strike yesterday morning against an increase in the price of the papers from 50 cents a 100 copies to 70 cents. The boys say at the old price they were only able to make about 25 cents a day, and that the increase in the price to them would mean a loss of livelihood. Early in the morning, half a dozen small figures were grouped about their leader, Jack Sullivan. They comprised the members of the arbitration committee who had gone as a last resort to the papers to demand their rights. "Well met, brave men? What news?" The leader's voice was husky as he put the question.
"It's this away,"
said Boots, the spokesman of the committee.
"We went to the bloke what sells the papers and we tells him that it's gotta be 2 for a cent or nothing. And he says, what are you gonna do about it if you don't get him? Strike, says I, and Monix, he puts in his oar and backs me up. The bloke says go ahead and strike. And here he is."
Newsies is a 1992 movie starring Christian Bale and an ensemble of young boys. It retells an actual historical event, the Newsboys' Strike of 1899, in which a tight-knit collective of young men working for a large media company chose to strike due to corporate mistreatment. The strike only ends when the titular Newsies seize the means of production and begin publishing their own alternative media, which catches the attention of then-Governor Theodore Roosevelt himself, who rules in the union's favour on every single issue. The movie flopped, unfortunately failing to make a lasting cultural impact and usher in a golden age for socialism in America. This isn't a huge surprise. The film isn't great. After all, it did win a Razzie. However, it still managed to become a cult classic, garnering a significant and dedicated fan base of young women and theatre kids. Newsies is also a 2011 stage musical starring Jeremy Jordan and an ensemble of attractive Broadway twinks, and an adaptation of the movie of the same name. Most of the plot is the same, but some characters were left on the cutting room floor. Love interest of Jack Kelly and sister of Davy Jacobs, Sarah Jacobs, yes, in that order, was excised from the story and replaced with Catherine Plummer, sympathetic investigative journalist, daughter to media mogul Joseph Pulitzer, and love interest is Jack Kelly again, but at least it's in third place this time. Catherine actually pulls double duty, replacing uninteresting journalist character Brian Denton. This is, by all accounts, a great decision. With an already huge ensemble cast, cutting down on supporting characters makes sense, as does redistributing duties to make for a more equal main trio, Jack, Catherine, and Davy. Furthermore, Catherine's presence as a character provides a strong, well-written, and relatable female lead, and grounds the show more in its historical and political context.
On the 22nd of September, I was asked by the World if I could have myself committed to one of the asylums for the insane in New York, with a view to writing a plain and unvarnished narrative of the treatment of the patients therein and the methods of management, etc. Did I think I had the courage to go through such an ordeal as the mission would demand? Could I assume the characteristics of insanity to such a degree that I could pass the doctors, live for a week among the insane without the authorities there finding out that I was only a chiel among them taking notes? I said I believed I could. I had some faith in my own ability as an actress and thought I could assume insanity long enough to accomplish any mission entrusted to me. Could I pass a week in the insane ward at Blackwell's Island? I said I could, and I would. And I did. My instructions were simply to go on with my work as soon as I felt that I was ready. I was to chronicle faithfully the experiences I underwent, and when once within the walls of the asylum, to find out and describe its inside workings, which are always so effectually hidden by white-capped nurses, as well as by bolts and bars from the knowledge of the public. We do not ask you to go there for the purpose of making sensational revelations. Write up things as you would find them, good or bad, give praise to blame as you think best, and the truth all the time. But I am afraid of that chronic smile of yours, said the editor. I will smile no more, I said, and I went away to execute my delicate and, as I found out, difficult mission.
In 1887, journalist Elizabeth Cochrane burst into the office of newspaper magnate Joseph Pulitzer, intent on pitching a story. Cochrane, working under the pen name Nellie Bly, wanted to travel to Europe and back by steerage class. That's the area of the boat with all the poor people on it. You might recognize it from Titanic. She intended to write a report on the immigrant experience. Pulitzer dismissed the idea, but put forward one of his own. Bly was to disguise herself as a mental patient and go undercover in Blackwell's Island Asylum, now known as Roosevelt Island. To report on the conditions there. Conditions at Blackwell's Island were bad, since it catered to those society had largely forgotten, women who were mentally ill, immigrants, or poor. Bly took on the task with determination, and after successfully entering the asylum, she spent 10 entire days observing and experiencing every abuse the system had to offer. These horrors included forced, icy cold baths, druggings, beatings, and worse. However, harrowing as it was, Bly's reporting wasn't just a grab at the most sensational possible headlines. She also documented the lives of these forgotten people and how little their carers actually cared for them, and used her position as a reporter to push for real change. And, surprisingly enough, things did get better. Well, things got better in one asylum, in one city, a little bit, for a while. Maybe. More on that later. Bly didn't stop there, going on to have a prolific and successful career reporting on all sorts of stunts and injustices. She's perhaps most famous for having circumnavigated the Earth in 72 days, a world record at the time, and 8 full days ahead of Jules Verne protagonist Phileas Fogg. In fact, historians have widely recognized that the New York World's success under Pulitzer can be attributed to its appeal to vulnerable members of society, such as immigrants, women, and the working poor. Thus, an argument could be made that Pulitzer's success is inextricably linked to Bly's, her sense for sensation, her sympathy for the downtrodden, and her general mass appeal. The pair's success was noticed by other papers too. Imitations of Bly's style became so common that they constituted a new genre, the girl stunt reporter. Winifred Sweet Black of the San Francisco Examiner faked a fainting spell on a downtown street for an exposé on the city's emergency services, then grifted her way into an interview with Benjamin Harrison, the then President of the United States. Ada Patterson of the St. Louis Republican used the Bly formula too, scaling the St. Louis Tower while it was still under construction, and becoming the first woman ever to witness a legal hanging in America. A more modern example of the woman stunt reporter is Talia Lavin, author of the book Culture Warlords. Culture Warlords is a fascinating read, documenting Lavin's experience catfishing her way into the inner circles of the alt-right and uncovering their inner workings. If you're at all interested in opposing the white supremacist movement and participating in anti-fascist activity, her book is a must-read, and a purchase link is available in the video description. Anyway, in the 1880s, this archetype didn't just represent a new genre of sensationalist yellow journalism, or a channel for exposing injustice for that matter. It was also one of the very few channels available for women to transcend the society pages and break their way into real journalism. Many of the sources I used while researching this segment cite the book Front Page Girls by Jean-Marie Lutz, which details the history of women journalists between 1880 and 1930. It outlines the importance of girl stunt reporters to progress in the newsroom, as well as the major inroads black women were making in the field of journalism. Knowing all this, it's no surprise that Cara Lindsay, who originated the role of Catherine Plummer, based her portrayal of the character on Bly. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind that those tasked with adapting Newsies for theatre must have known of her, either through research or through reputation. Like Bly, Plummer is gutsy, willing to put her own career and personal safety on the line for the sake of a story. She's aware of her place in the industry, and the lengths to which she must go to change it and to prove her abilities. So she makes herself invaluable by embedding herself in the very events she seeks to cover. Plummer is similarly associated with the New York world, Bly's working relationship with Pulitzer having passed through the lens of theatre and been interpreted as a familial one. She also uses a nom de plume like Bly, and she shows no hesitation going toe-to-toe with people much more powerful than herself. Finally, Plummer has similar motivations. She doesn't only strive to prove her ability and escape the society pages, but to unearth the previously hidden struggle of a marginalized group. I'm not trying to make the case that Catherine's some sort of feminist icon, or I'm not only trying to do that. And I'm not trying to claim Nellie Bly as a woke queen either. She had some... She was a woman of her time, and she had some interesting ways of writing about sex workers and people of color. The reason I'm making this comparison is to show that Plummer doesn't only provide girl boss representation. She's also a plausible instance of a real-life historical archetype, the girl stunt reporter, and that makes her a lead. I believe that if we pull on that thread, we can unravel the historical context behind Newsies, and its relevance to the current day. But first, let's hear it for our boys in blue. Frankfort Street at Park Row, where the distributing depots of the newspapers are, was in a pandemonium this morning, soon after 9 o'clock. The striking newsboys had armed themselves with staves and sticks, and they gave the policemen on duty more trouble than the strikers of the great street railroad lines. Many of the boys have been in trouble with the police on former occasions, and it was feared that they would do some mischief. About 9:25 o'clock this morning, a group of 25 of them, armed with staffs, marched down Centre Street, cheering and shouting. They entered City Hall Park at Chambers Street and were marching through the park in solid order when a policeman charged them. The signs, "Keep off the grass," were ignored in the hasty and disorderly retreat. The company was finally rallied in an alley, and a new line of march to Frankfort Street, the scene of hostilities, was taken up. On arriving there, a big policeman gathered up half a dozen boys in his arms. All but 2 of them managed to wriggle out of his grasp. The other 2 he took to the station house and charged with disorderly conduct. They will be turned over to the Jerry Society. Depending on who you ask, we may or may not live in a society, but if we do live in one, we live in one where the dominant ideology is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is, broadly speaking, a belief that free markets and competition are the ideal way to distribute resources. Government spending and intervention is kept to a minimum, and it's economic growth and freedom that bring long-term growth to a society. None of this anti-interventionism, of course, applies to the police, though. In America, massive amounts of money is funneled into the police force from federal and local budgets. For example, the City of LA's 2021 budget dedicates a whopping 13% of government spending to the police force. Likewise, in the United Kingdom, both major parties back increasing the size of the police state, all while attacking the other for slacking on safety or being far too lenient on offenders.
On the 6th of May, you will have a say in how your community is run.
Now, I'm here today in Southampton speaking about the Tory failure on crime. Violent crime is up in every single police force area of England and Wales. And frankly, under the Tories, criminals have never had it so good.
You will decide who works with this Conservative government to deliver 20,000 more police officers.
We need, first of all, to see more police on our streets, in our communities, not sat behind desks.
And as your Member of Parliament, he'll put police back on the streets of Hartlepool.
With over 6,000 already recruited to cut crime and to make our streets and neighbourhoods safer.
He'll work with Labour's team of councillors to make the town a safer place to live.
So let's send that message to the Tories that we want safer streets.
Labour voted against laws to put victims first and opposed measures to keep our streets safer.
And we need a victims law that puts the victims of crime at the very heart of our policing and criminal justice system, not an afterthought as they have been too often under the Tories.
So on Thursday, 6th of May, vote Dr. Paul Williams as your next MP and vote for your local Labour councillors.
On Thursday, the 6th of May, vote Conservative.
So, why is it that these groups who claim to oppose each other use such similar talking points when discussing the police? Per The End of Policing by Alex Vital, in the liberal worldview, democratic processes create a state representative of the general will of the people, which in turn creates laws with the goal of keeping societies safe. Then the police represent the interests of the state, who represent the people. It's all very... As the state's legitimate mechanism for dealing out violence, the proverbial long arm of the law, they use this power to stamp out crime and capture bad people. This is what gets presented in media, too. Police procedurals are massively profitable, and their very format promotes this version of the police, which has given rise to the fun phrase, copaganda. Even shows that present as woke or progressive, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, hold the idea of the police as well-intentioned do-gooders at their core. It's this view and its propagation through media that give rise to the "a few bad apples" adage, the idea that harm caused by the police is either justified or anomalous. Because the police, they indirectly work for us, right? They're our guys, they're here to solve our problems. Right? Well, no, not exactly. The liberal perception of the police force is clearly not representative of reality. It's never been representative of reality. Let's take a look back at some history. London's Metropolitan Police Force is often held up as the original police force, but American police forces formed much earlier on account of slavers' need to prevent enslaved people from harbouring fugitives, conducting meetings, or learning to read or write. In short, to discourage a group of oppressed people from organising. That's going to be one of our recurring themes here. Put a pin in that. When slavery was abolished, these watches and guards took on new purposes, maintaining inequality under the new normal. Despite having been nominally freed, black people were still stuck in a bad economic situation and without many options. Some were forced to take up productive employment, usually sharecropping under a white landowner. Sharecropping is the borderline feudalistic practice of having to give someone else a portion of your harvest in exchange for the right to farm on land which they say is theirs. Alternatively, one could remain unemployed, be arrested for the crime of vagrancy, and be convicted and forcibly put to work, either through prison farms or convict leasing. In fact, some didn't even get option 1. Many sheriffs and judges received kickbacks from employers for the service of arresting black employees and leasing them back to them for greater profit margins. The same laws and political systems used to punish black people were also closed off from their influence via poll taxes and other voter suppression methods. Methods enforced, again, through the mechanism of the police. You can see the police filling this role all throughout American history, particularly in the Jim Crow era, where laws were put into place to enforce segregation in the South. But what about the UK, though? What about that, the London Met? Well, the history of policing in the UK actually begins in Ireland. One Robert Peel founded the Peace Preservation Force in Ireland in 1814. The Peace Preservation Force was less concerned with the preventing and detecting of crime, and more concerned with coercively quelling unrest within the local population. Peel went on to found the London Metropolitan Police Force, giving rise to the nickname Bobbies or Peelers, no relation. These policemen were unarmed and less militarized than their Irish counterparts, but they also served to protect property, quell riots, and put down strikes. As a wave of workers' movement swept the UK, local law enforcement first requested the help of the Met to restore order, and then began to create their own London-style police departments. It's also worth noting that the PPF and its later form, the Royal Irish Constabulary, served as a practical prototype not just for policing in the UK, but for colonial policing as well, the policing of indigenous people who were resistant to British rule. In 1844, the British Empire established a police force in Hong Kong. By 1845, it had been fully reorganised and remodelled based on the Irish Constabulary. This same colonial police force keeps order here in Hong Kong to this day. Does this vestigial police force have implications for our independence? Are we complicit in our own colonization by keeping them around? Who can say? Certainly not me. I wouldn't want to violate any national security laws or receive any visits from... In 1867, an Irish-style armed constabulary was established in New Zealand to seize control from indigenous Maori forces. The modern-day New Zealand police force is, again, the same organization. So, what are the implications of an ostensibly egalitarian society keeping control in the same way that it did in the colonial era? During the colonization of India, semi-military Irish-style police forces were again installed to keep public order, and this template was applied on a national scale when the Indian police force was established in 1861. This template was used for future British colonies too, particularly those within the Far East and British Africa. Just as the UK exported local policing tactics to colonies, America was adapting colonial police tactics for its own domestic disputes. When Pennsylvania's coal and iron police, who were used to break strikes and workers' movements, lost legitimacy in the public eye after massacring 19 miners, That's the kind that dig holes, not children. Jesus. Oh, God. A new solution was needed to keep the peace. Thus, in 1905, Pennsylvania created America's first statewide police force, modeling it on the Philippine Constabulary, which had been established to... You get the point. Anyway, this new type of police force was even less under the control of local communities. You couldn't really touch them unless you were, or you knew, or you could otherwise influence a state-level politician, and this gave large employers even more power, and workers' movements even less. The US did as the UK did as well, involving itself in the creation of local police forces in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua. These forces committed horrific human rights abuses, including mass murder, in support of repressive US-backed regimes. The US has also established police forces in Japan, South Korea, and South Vietnam for the purposes of gathering intelligence and countering insurgencies. So, what does this complex web of slavers and the enslaved, colonizers and the colonized have to do with modern-day policing? First of all, it demonstrates that policing hasn't always existed, and this incestuous polycule of messed up power dynamics is responsible, to some degree, for nearly every aspect of modern policing. It also demonstrates that there's no guarantee that a police force will serve all of its constituents. In fact, in most of the cases we've looked at, they were never intended to. Police forces are often established externally by those with power, and then they go on to maintain that power dynamic. This shouldn't be surprising, of course. It's those with power who control police budgets and so on, and thus police forces are only accountable to them. Relationships between police and individual communities, inherited laws, and value systems imposed by colonial powers, and even entire extant police forces continue to affect people today, even in independent, nominally egalitarian nations. It's just too difficult to cause meaningful change in something that's so ingrained in our culture, and efforts to do so tend to be unpopular or even criminalized. I mean, look at the Black Lives Matter movement's efforts in America, or the Kill the Bill protests in the UK, which Claudia Boleyn has discussed in great detail on her own channel. Cool. Nice. We live in a society. What does all this have to do with Newsies?
It's about time you showed up! They're slaughtering us!
Yeah, that would do it. Okay, let's dig into the scene a little. At face value, this reaction to the appearance of a policeman makes zero sense, and I don't mean that from an ACAB radical SJW perspective, although we'll be getting plenty of that later. The show indicates that these characters have previously been arrested for offences as minor as loitering, and that they're familiar with the mechanics of how a strike works in 1899 New York. After all, there's much discussion of concurrent violent trolley strikes and the associated police action. That said, I don't think this scene exists for the Newsies as characters. Rather, it's there for the generally liberal audience to indicate a deviation from the standard media portrayal of the police. This newsboy, who probably has a name and a massive fan base willing to cancel me for forgetting it, is standing in for the audience by expecting a certain outcome and experiencing a different one. This is the show saying, I know you think the police are a certain way, but in this case they're doing something different. Something bad. I don't know how I feel about this. I understand the utility of the scene, of course, but I find the way it disavows the police action in its own narrative by presenting it as abnormal or anomalous I don't like it. I think it contributes to this bad apple idea and lessens the impact of an interesting, semi-historical take on an important topic. Now, let's look at this scene involving Pulitzer and Snyder.
But I've read your editorials, Mr. Pulitzer. How can you express so much sympathy for the trolley workers and yet have none for the Newsies?
Because the trolley workers are striking for a fair contract. The Newsies are striking against me.
Well, I'd spare you this embarrassment if I could. But the burlesque house is private property.
He can't order a raid without legal cause.
Let's get the obvious out of the way. The cart's being put before the horse. Evidence is presented as an obstacle to be surmounted rather than as a reason to take action. This is common in cop-centric media, usually in the context of, oh, I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. But you don't usually see it in stuff that's not, actual propaganda. This is sleazy and the show knows it. Furthermore, it cements the distinction between law enforcement activities and the actual solving of crimes. It doesn't matter to Pulitzer whether there's legal cause or not. He's just looking to exert force through legitimate channels. This is some Central Park Karen shit. He's trying to swat these union organizers. The classic Elon Musk. Next, listen to how Jack is described.
Mr. Mayor, would the fact that this rally is organized by an escaped convict be cause enough to shut it down?
An escaped convict?
A fugitive from one of your own institutions. A convicted thief at large, wreaking mischief on our law-abiding community. Mr. Snyder, which one is he?
That is him there. Jack Kelly.
And how do you know this boy?
His is not a pleasant story. He was first sentenced to my refuge for loitering and vagrancy, but his total disregard for authority has made him a frequent visitor.
You called him a thief, an escaped convict.
After his release, I caught him myself, red-handed, trafficking stolen food and clothing. He was last sentenced to 6 months, but the willful ruffian escaped.
So you'd be doing the city a service, removing this criminal from our streets.
If that's the case, we can take him in, quietly.
What good would quiet do me?
Escaped convict, fugitive, wreaking mischief on our law-abiding community. These are all technically true, but also clearly misleading. I mean, come on, the crimes the character is accused of are vagrancy and stealing food to feed starving children. That's not even Jean Valjean tier, that's Robin Hood level folk hero stuff. This represents a disconnect between the punishment of crime and morality, and it shows how the use of labels such as criminal and fugitive are loaded. It doesn't matter what somebody actually did or how comically virtuous one's actions are, as long as you can be painted as a lawbreaker. Labels such as criminal are used to lump together everything from minor drug infractions and homelessness to mass murder. Finally, so you'd be doing the city a service, removing this criminal from the streets. Where have we heard this rhetoric before?
So let's send that message to the Tories that we want safer streets.
Labour voted against laws to put victims first and opposed measures to keep our streets safer.
These two scenes illustrate that the role law enforcement plays in any two people's lives can be massively different. It depends on your economic and social situation and your proximity to power. To somebody who wields power and can avoid having to perform criminalized actions, law enforcement solves the purpose it has in the liberal imagination, an avenue through which force can be used, directly or indirectly, to protect your interests. To somebody who doesn't, whether that's a poor person, a person of colour, a worker, whatever, the opposite is true. The police can be used as a cudgel, coercing you into an unequal or even exploitative relationship with your oppressors. Attempts to free yourself from that cycle, whether that's through mass protest, collective action, or heck, why not, crime, eat the rich. Those attempts are met with disproportionate state-sanctioned violence. Because more likely than not, the cops don't work for you. They work to maintain stability, or the status quo. And if that status quo isn't good for you, woof. It doesn't matter how correct you are, or how moral you are, or who gets helped or harmed by your actions. If the right person decides they don't like you, they can make you disappear.
We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been two kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head, and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down his pen again. And the union workhouses? Demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say that they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then, said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid from what you'd said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I am very glad to hear it.
One major element in both the filmed and musical version of Newsies is the Refuge, a home for juvenile delinquents with absolutely horrific conditions. The more children are brought in, the more the city pays them, but the money ultimately goes to the warden, Snyder's, pockets. Obviously, some of the details about the Refuge, particularly the ones relating to individual characters, might be fictional, but the New York House of Refuge actually did exist. It was established in 1825 with an initial population of 9 inmates. That's 6 boys and 3 girls. Children could be committed for vagrancy, that's essentially homelessness, or petty crimes, and they could be committed all the way until adulthood. The population of the New York House of Refuge rose quickly, and within its first decade of operation, 1,678 inmates were admitted. Immigrants in particularly were heavily targeted, with 63% of those committed between 1825 and 1855 being of Irish descent. Once you got in, life in the refuge was also not pleasant. Per the New York State Education Department,
a large part of an inmate's daily schedule was devoted to supervised labor, which was regarded as beneficial to education and discipline. Inmate labor also supported operating expenses for the reformatory. Typically, male inmates produced brushes, cane chairs, brass nails, and shoes. The female inmates made uniforms, worked in the laundry, and performed other domestic work. A badge system was used to segregate inmates according to their behavior. Students were instructed in basic literacy skills. There was also great emphasis on evangelical religious instruction, although non-Protestant clergy were excluded. The reformatory had the authority to bind out inmates through indenture agreements, by which employers agreed to supervise them during their employment. Although initially several inmates were sent to sea, most male and female inmates were sent out to work as farm and domestic laborers respectively.
I hope I don't need to explain to you how this is unacceptable. Unless you work for The Guardian or the Los Angeles Times, you're probably opposed to coerced labor in all its forms, and even more opposed to child labor. These are baselines, and I shouldn't have to explain to you why these things are wrong. But prison labor is legal in the US. I mean, the 13th Amendment bans forced labor and slavery except in the case of criminal punishment. And even if this allowance is being abused, these people are in prison, right? Like, the point of being in prison is that it's supposed to kind of suck. It's not a holiday or a summer school, right? Wait. We're getting ahead of ourselves here. What is the point in prison?
There is a French woman confined in Hall 6, or was during my stay, whom I firmly believe to be perfectly sane. I watched her and talked with her every day, excepting the last 3, and I was unable to find any delusion or mania in her. Her name is Josephine Despraux, if that is spelled correctly, and her husband and all her friends are in France. Josephine feels her position keenly, her lips tremble, and she breaks down crying when she talks of her helpless position. "How did you get here?" I asked.
One morning, as I was trying to get breakfast, I grew deathly sick, and 2 officers were called in by the woman of the house, and I was taken to the station house. I was unable to understand their proceedings, and they paid little attention to my story. Doings in this country were new to me, and before I realized it, I was lodged as an insane woman in this asylum. When I first came, I cried that I was ill without hope of release, and for crying, Miss Grady and her assistants choked me until they hurt my throat, for it has been sore ever since.
10 days in a madhouse doesn't just represent a milestone moment for women in the newsroom. It also represents a first-hand account of somebody's experience in prison, or prison-like conditions, in the 19th century. While by face value an asylum for the insane isn't necessarily the same thing as a prison, aren't they? I mean, Bly is brought before a court by the police and sentenced by a judge after she's found unwilling and unable to work. This is the route she deemed most efficient before entry, and the same story was repeated almost verbatim by other women within the asylum, suggesting that this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. This is, of course, by design. The primary goal of a prison is neither to punish nor rehabilitate, and neither were the functions of the Refuge or of Blackwell's Island to educate or heal. No, society has mechanisms to remove its inconvenient or non-productive members, and where else is it going to put them except behind bars? Think of the kids in cages rhetoric and how quickly it changed after Joe Biden was elected president of the United States. The minute a supposedly liberal president takes office, suddenly concentration camps become overflow facilities and migrant shelters, and where else are we supposed to put them? Do you want these kids on the streets? Is that the future liberals want? People think of imprisonment as a necessary evil because there isn't room in society for some kinds of people. Prison is, under its various names and forms, the clothes chair of society, for those who can't or won't be made to fit anywhere else. Are you poor, foreign, neurodivergent? Are you disabled, a woman, or otherwise unable to work? Okay, I guess there's only one place left for you. Make sure to pick up your grippy socks on your way in the door. The women in Blackwell's Island during Bly's stay weren't committed out of malice. Well, no, some, like Sarah Fishbaum, whose husband had grown tired of her, were, but even she was arguably committed for the same reason as everybody else in the book. A court, or some other government body, had seen her case and decided that something needed to be done about her. After all, nobody was going to take care of her. But when your only tool is a gavel, everything starts to look like... What? When your only tool is a gavel, everything starts to look like those things that they hit with gavels. I've no doubt that the judge who committed Bly, and even asked for her to be treated well, wasn't lying about having good intentions, even if his reasoning was a little bit strange. In fact, I don't think his case was anomalous even. I'm sure many of the women in Blackwell's were committed in an effort to protect them. However, out of sight is out of mind, and since they haven't got any way to advocate for themselves, incarcerated people, whether they're in for a crime, mental health reasons, or for being a child vagrant, can easily end up in circumstances that suck. There's not really a way to be certain that those that the state deigns to house in its facilities, or that the taxpayer money that they send to facilitate their upkeep, are being treated in a way that's not selfish or objectionable. And that's how you get stuff like the Refuge. I know this is a really weird tangent for a video about Newsies, but I've been writing this video for so long. This incoherent mess is what you're getting. I've got nothing left to say on the topic except that the situation is fucked up. I mean, God, it's fucked up that society's mechanism for dealing with those who don't fit is to lock them in a cage until either it changes or they do. It's fucked up that the only response the law has for people with legitimate grievances and vulnerabilities, those who capitalism harms the most, is violence, policing, and prison, and that the same tools are used for treatment as the ones that are used for punishment. And it's fucked up that the structures put in place by inequality and depression are still in place, and even those who claim to denounce oppression and inequality still support that system. Even if the state were interested in helping those who needed help the most countries don't have the tools to do so. They've practically systematically destroyed all their actually useful things in favor of bloated criminal justice systems, prisons, and prison-like facilities, which they then use to tackle any and every issue, like they're pushing square pegs through round fucking holes. God! I started writing this video when I was 17. I just wanted to talk about dancing newsboys. Fuck.
The two jurors then visited the kitchen. It was very clean, and 2 barrels of salt stood conspicuously open near the door. The bread on exhibition was beautifully white and wholly unlike what was given to us to eat. We found the halls in the finest order. The beds were improved, and in Hall 7, the buckets in which we were compelled to wash had been replaced by bright new basins. The institution was on exhibition, and no fault could be found. But the women I had spoken of, where were they? Not one was to be found where I had left them. If my assertions were not true in regard to these patients, why should the latter be changed so to make me unable to find them? Miss Neville complained before the jury of being changed several times. When we visited the hall later, she was returned to her old place. I hardly expected the grand jury to sustain me after they saw everything different from what it had been while I was there. Yet they did, and their report to the court advises all the changes made that I had proposed. I have one consolation for my work. On the strength of my story, the Committee of Appropriation provides $1 million more than ever before was given for the benefit of the insane.
10 Days in a Madhouse ends with Bly presenting her case to a grand jury and securing $1 million of funding to improve conditions for the insane. Newsies ends with one Governor Roosevelt arriving and settling the union's dispute with their employer, shutting down the Refuge for their misconduct. The Disney Animator strike was ended by President Roosevelt arbitrating a union's dispute with their employer. But waiting for Daddy Roosevelt or the grand jury to arbitrate every individual dispute will still never get us anywhere. The vast majority of government intervention in union disputes has been... And none of these band-aid solutions address the larger-scale problems that arise from modern employment, policing, and the prison industrial complex. I mean, come on. In situations where funds are already being misused, you can hardly expect me to believe $1,000 or $1 million extra is going to change anything, right? Newsies makes a whole bunch of interesting points due to its historical nature, and it provides an amazing jumping-off point for future research into a whole host of interesting topics. But it's unable to conceive of larger-scale change. You could attribute this to a lot of things. For example, you might say that the Overton window in America is so absurdly right-shifted that while faithful interpretations of the past are necessarily left-wing, prescriptive statements need to be kind of right-wing and neoliberal in order to do well with American audiences. Like, it's all well and good, you can say, oh yeah, well, corporations historically did this bad thing, but you're not going to get very far with an entirely anti-corporate agenda. You could also say that it's because Disney has a vested interest in promoting corporate-friendly values, even under a thin veneer of progressivism, and even if leftism did sell well, they still wouldn't jump on the Twitter communist all cops are bad bandwagon, although it would be undeniably funny to see Disney try it. There's probably a little truth to both of these things, and that's why we shouldn't be looking to an American diversified multinational mass media and entertainment conglomerate to tell us how to push towards social change. I mean, this video was supposed to come out last November, but in a way it makes sense that it's coming out in June, right? Like, when else are corporations so interested in portraying themselves as progressive or as allies? Even still, I think we can use the movies, books, and shows that we love, or hell, even the ones that we don't, as jumping off points for future research, and to interrogate the stances that our culture holds on certain issues. Perhaps more than anything else, pop culture trash, big corporate detritus, focus grouped, disposable, artless media, reflects the changing views of the general public. This video is disjointed as hell, and it gives even less advice than the show it's about on how to fix society and so on. But like, that's okay. I'm 18. I've got plenty of time to do more reading. And maybe in a couple of years I'll finally have read enough theory to write a prescriptive rather than descriptive video. A video on what we should do instead of, what's been happening. But for now, you really shouldn't be listening to me. You should be doing your own research and your own reading. To that end, I'll be publishing my bibliography, which is full of people smarter than me, as well as some links to relevant videos that cover similar topics. I'll also be linking the website of the rapper Noname's book club, which is focused primarily on radical texts by authors of colour. You can read as many or as few of the linked items as you want, but again, this video is not supposed to be good theory, or even correct, let alone the definitive resource on any of the themes covered. And really, I don't think it can be.
It's this way, said Boots, the spokesman of the committee. We went to the bloke what sells the papers, we tells him that it's gotta be 2 for a cent and nothing. He says, what are you gonna do about it if you don't got 'em? Strike, says I, and Monix, he puts in his oar and backs me up. The bloke says, go ahead and strike. And here we is, that's all.